What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Conflicts of Interest post Horton Kristol debate breakdown. I have with me today my good friends Joanne Leon and Conor Freeman. Just before we get into breaking it down, I did want to mention that I do work at the Libertarian Institute, where Scott is the director and Conor is a writer there. And of course, Joanne, while doesn't have any like official ties to Scott Horton, has interviewed him on her show several times. And if you love Scott Horton, you gotta listen to the interviews that Joanne does with him. She gets the absolute most out of Scott because she asks the most detailed questions, and so Scott like already knows like the bases are covered, and he could just get into the really technical, high level stuff that Scott loves to talk about. So definitely check out Around the Empire and the Scott Horton interviews there. So there's a lot of things we could take away from the debate. I kind of had three moments, but I want each of us to like have like three takeaways, and then we'll do a summary at the end. Try to, keep it 10 hour, and just what we thought of it. I guess just real quick, maybe introduce it. This is a big moment for Scott Horton, for Antiwar.com, and for the Libertarian Institute. I want to like acknowledge that. Like I work there, and I think it is a big deal for the Institute for Scott to get on the stage with Bill Kristol and be able to have it out and like actually be on that platform. So that's the reason why I want to do this breakdown right away. That's the reason that, of course, I paid the Soho Forum, and I think it's amazing that Gene Epstein put this together. And with that, let's just get right into it. Everybody, please check out either the Libertarian Institute or Joanne's show Around the Empire. And then just a big thank you to the sponsor of this show, Paloma Verde, and get your CBD at palomaverdecbd.com and use the promo code PEACE. All right, guys, let's do it. Joanne, you're up first.
Hey, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for bringing me on this reaction show. We all sort of just watched this debate. We just finished. I wanted to note that at the beginning of the debate, Epstein said that this is the biggest debate that they've had so far at the Soho Forum. I don't recall the numbers, but I think they were going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 plus in the room, and then they had more than 100 online because they also provided a live stream. And so I thought that was a big deal. It was kind of a David versus Goliath, if you will, in terms of the foreign policy establishment. Kristol is one of definitely part of the foreign policy establishment. And Scott, while he is a big figure to us, there's probably a lot of people who don't, aren't aware of him, but they probably are now. In the opener, I thought, first of all, it didn't look like Kristol prepared his remarks. He didn't appear to be reading. It seemed to be off the cuff. It was a bit incoherent. I had a hard time following the points that he was trying to make, but if I had to sort of sum up what I thought he was saying, at least through some of it, was, he digs back like a century and at least to World War II for anything sort of beneficial about wars. And he tries to make this narrative that we have all of these good things in our country and in the world because of war, because of the wars and intervention. Oh, we should probably read what the question was. I don't. Maybe you can put that up on the screen later, but I don't have it right in front of me. But basically,
it was more or less a willingness to engage in a broad and regime change is beneficial to American foreign policy. Roughly that. I was really surprised that he agreed to a resolution like that. I thought it was going to be a lot vaguer, so he would have some more room to work with. But that's what he came up with. And as Joanne said, it didn't sound like his argument was maybe really tailored to the resolution, or it didn't seem like well planned out beforehand.
Yeah. I don't think in comparison. Are we doing both opening remarks, Scott's and I'm commenting on both Scott and Kristol's opening remarks. So Kristol's opening remarks, I thought were, he's not a particularly good speaker. He's not a good speaker at all, if you ask me. I am biased. I really do not like this man. I have not liked this man for a very long time. He's a, he is one of the reasons why we have the wars that we did over the last 20 years. Anyway, so he does his opening remarks, and the only thing coherent I can really get out of that, or that I remember from it, was that he was trying to say that if not for all of our wars and interventions, we wouldn't have all the good things that we have. I was like, you got to be kidding me. Scott comes on an entirely different energy. He steps up to the mic. He's well prepared. He looks like he has not memorized, but he's rehearsed his opening remarks clearly, and he goes through. I mean, he just creams the guy. I mean, the difference. Even if you don't know the subject material and you're just looking at the two figures on the stage, Scott is more confident. He's more prepared. He has detailed arguments. He goes through periods of history. It's very coherent. I noticed that his wife is in the live chat, right? Because, well, for whatever reason, she couldn't come into the forum itself.
They went ahead and they did publicly. She said in the live chat was because her daughter was too young to be vaccinated. So
so they stood outside in the rain, and someone had a live stream there, and she was able to watch it at least. But she was commenting a lot in the live chat. But she had said, like, wait for the end. He had a very very strong ending, and the one thing I would say was unfortunate is that I guess his timing was a little bit off, and so Gene Epstein steps in and tries to get him to end twice. He interrupts him twice, and I thought, just let him finish, Jesus. So anyway, it did impact the strong ending, I would say, but just not enough to affect the overall impression of the two speakers and their opening remarks. So
yeah. So
that's
one thing I
what
did want to
that.
ask is, I know I've read Fool's Errand, and that was the most beautifully 20-minute abridged Scott reading of Fool's Errand that enough already, excuse me. That I could imagine. The cadence was perfect. My only concern listening to it was, I know Scott. You know what I mean? I listened to the Scott Horton show. I've read Fool's Errand. Was there enough information that somebody who hasn't read Fool's Errand was going to take something away from it? I mean, I really did think so, but that was my only one little concern about it, was that, maybe if you haven't read Fool's Errand, you would be like, what's he talking? But I think he did a good job of, like, taking out too many of the Scottisms and stuff like that, and really, like, using the, like, Syria, Libya, Gaddafi, what I mean, making sure that, like, really it sounded very authoritative. I was on the debate team, and I mean, I'm not trying to brag about myself, but I was pretty decent in high school and college, and so like I thought, like, a lot of it is just presentation, right? And I felt like anybody who just watched the two, Scott sounded like a history book, and Bill Kristol sounded like he had taken essentially Sid's different, like, MSNBC appearances and basically just clipped them together, right? Like, it's just like 3-minute talking points Sid's times. And so yeah. Anyways, Connor, what you got?
Well, I will say I agree, and I think that what Scott did was extremely effective, because even if you weren't familiar with all the different, like, names and groups and the groups of the names of the different groups involved, the way he did explain it was you intervened here and here, and then you wanted this out. Like, the most important thing I thought, like, to hit Kristol with was how his desired outcomes kept completely crumbling, and he was getting the opposite of what he had intended, notably like in Iraq and Syria. And then I think Scott did a terrific job of showing the continuity, like you said, and abridged enough already between, Iraq War II and then the veterans of that war going back to Libya and Syria and Yemen, where America takes their side. Because what was interesting was Kristol, as you watch the debate, he starts off making a lot of platitudes that are boilerplate kind of nonsense that anybody who's, like you said, watched MSNBC enough or heard or watched Fox News. It's sort of, well, because we spread democracy, we have a much more prosperous world. We've kept the peace, and there hasn't been a nuclear war since, and no one's dropped nukes since 45, and this sort of thing. And he talks about how, the world, I guess, is a safer place because of all this stuff. But what happened was once he got out of that, once it became a real conversation because of Scott's opening statement, and then obviously the way it goes from then there's a rebuttal and then they go back and forth and they have these differing exchanges. Kristol just started resorting to outright lies on a lot of like recent history. One of the greatest moments in the debate was when he basically was saying that. I guess he was obscuring the reasons we were attacked on 9/11. Even if you go by the official story, then we were attacked because of, the bases in Saudi Arabia, the dual containment strategy of Iran and Iraq, our support for Israel and their occupations in Palestine and in southern Lebanon, as well as, the sanctions and the embargo and the bombings of Iraq. And so when he put that to Kristol basically denied it. And there's a great moment where Scott says to him, well, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. And he goes, have you ever read Lawrence Wright's, I think he said, The Looming Tower, or Terry McDermott's Perfect Soldiers? And he goes, look, the Hamburg cell, the lead hijackers, Muhammad Atta signs his last will and testament after Israel launches Operation Grapes of Wrath in April of 96 in southern Lebanon, and notably the Conor Massacre takes place, where they kill over 100 civilians, mostly women and children, and in a UN shelter. And he goes, and that's when he did it. And that's a few months later when bin Laden puts out his first fatwa, declaration of war against Americans occupying the land of the two holy places. And Kristol just kind of, if I'm correct, we'd have to go back and look at. There were a few moments of this where Scott would say something like that, or just point out how actually no, we did intervene in Syria, and your narrative that we just didn't, and it's a real blight on our record. Scott would put the facts out there and really forcefully, and then Kristol would just kind of go. And there were even parts where Epstein was like, "Would you like to respond?" There were at least a couple of times where he asked Kristol, and Kristol was just like, no. Like, it was very bad. So I'll just say that he also said things like, we weren't involved in the Iran-Iraq war. It's just really a lot. There was a lot of lying. I didn't know. I thought he would try and act like he's very proud of the record and then lie about it. But instead he just sort of, I didn't know he would deliberately obfuscate things like it's obvious that we backed Saddam in the Iran-Iraq war. It's obvious why we were attacked on 9/11. It's 20 years later. Most people know that stuff. So for him to just say, and then there was that part where, and then I'll stop, when he actually got into that conversation about Al-Qaeda, and Kristol pivots pathetically to go, well, you think the Taliban are going to you think these people are going to live in liberty and civility now that we've left? And Scott was like, no. It was incredible. He's like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. Anyway, those were some of the things I noticed, was just how quickly he had to resort to lying, and really just revealed himself to be not a serious thinker. Certainly not on the level of Scott, because I think this guy comes from a pampered background. Irving Kristol is his father. He's every day of his life he's been a part of the establishment, and so he hasn't had to work hard. He hasn't been the opinion editor of Antiwar.com like Scott or Kyle. So he doesn't read this stuff every day. He doesn't even care, really. I mean, he just needs to know enough to sell the wars he wants. And then they keep bringing him on MSNBC, and he's with that rapper guy. And I don't know what. The liberals think he's like some sort of a nice old man now or something. I have no idea. But he was not prepared for this at all.
So real quick, everyone, Conor did an amazing job talking for anybody who's just watching the video, as Patrick MacFarlane, host of the Liberty Weekly podcast, joined the stream. And so he'll be helping us break it down. Pat, just so you know, we're talking about a couple debate highlights each, and then we'll do a summary at the end. Just like myself and Connor, Pat does work at the Libertarian Institute. So, we're not pretending that, we're the most unbiased crowd here, that, we all didn't come in already believing what Scott had to say. Now, I'll just go ahead. My first highlight, and Connor already touched on it, was the Horton, the first kind of question cross-examination where they discussed really the reason for 9/11. And I mean, it was like a better debate form. It's what the Giuliani moment would have been if presidential debates were actually debates. You know what? If Ron Paul had the 3 minutes to say and explain it all, that's what he would have said. And I thought it was an extremely powerful moment, and definitely, hopefully, I think something that people will be clipping together for a long time. And again, I've been a part of a lot of debates, and after a cross-examination, if the other person is kind of like, and that's what they had to say and conclude with, I mean, even if you maybe did win the point, it really looks like you did it, but he
Kyle,
really
can I
did.
just
He just had
interject?
nothing to say.
Can I just interject real quick? They're in New York City too, right? So this argument about New York and 9/11, they're literally in New York City.
Right. So anyways, that was my first. Pat, go ahead. A takeaway or a highlight from the debate, something that you're interested in.
Yeah, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. So I watched the debate when I was watching my kids. So my observations of it are a little bit scattered and not as cogent. But at the same time, I think my first takeaway was just the degree of platitudes that Bill Kristol debated with. Was there wasn't any arguments, and when there was like facts to be relied on, it was mostly just assertions that weren't really established. So all this grand narrative that we learn in school about what World War II was and what the world would be if the United States wasn't involved. Just a lot of conjecture and not really any meat and potatoes behind it, I found. And as a part of that too, it really reminded me of the debate that our fellow colleague at the Libertarian Institute, Keith Knight, did with Kevin Castley, the neoconservative hawk on Twitter. And it really seemed like there were just two different versions of reality that were at play here. And admittedly, one version of reality was much more detailed and much more fact-based and oriented. I'm showing my bias here, but I think objectively this is true, is that one side of this debate actually gave facts and gave things that were well-sourced and reasoned, and the other side was just platitudes.
I would say zombie lies, but
yeah,
I'm not as generous as you.
All right, Joanne, go ahead. Second takeaway, highlight, whatever you got.
Yeah, so first off, he kept, I just want to reiterate that he kept saying that we didn't intervene in Syria. And the live chat, which I was watching pretty closely, was very biased toward Scott. The audience, honestly, it wasn't really noticeable whether, that was one of the things I was afraid of, that the live audience was going to be heavily skewed to Kristol, but I didn't get that sense at all. But anyway, he keeps saying we didn't intervene in Syria, and I'm like, we have troops in Syria right now. We've been in Syria since 2011. But anyway, I'd say at least 3 times he made that claim, and that he put that out as his example of what goes wrong when we don't intervene, which is just ridiculous. And I would call it a zombie lie. A zombie lie just never dies. They just keep bringing it up and bringing it up and bringing it up again. He did admit, like, in such a despicable, casual way, well, we were wrong about WMD. So he does concede that. I think it's the only concession he makes in the whole thing. And, my podcast is around the empire, so I'm interested in empires. He also denies that this is an empire. He's like, nah, we're not an empire. We are a benevolent hegemon. I forget I wish I remembered the term he used, But he just like
he did say that, and he goes, "I say that to be provocative."
Oh, he did. Oh, okay. And then later on,
Didn't
he
he
goes, "Well, maybe
also
it's a
say like
liberal
I'm
empire."
anti-war or something like that
That
too?
was
He
ridiculous.
said, "I'm anti-war." The whole live chat just exploded. Then it was like, "What?" Yeah, but yeah, he's like, "Well, maybe we're a liberal empire." And then he says something else like, I wish I had it." Anyway, just some kind of a little concession of, well, maybe a little bit of an empire, but no. And that's just ridiculous. So the other thing, yeah, I am anti-war, he says, which is, this guy has never met a war that he doesn't like. He's one of the first people they bring out when they're trying to sell a war. I mean, this is just a ridiculous statement. That's not even a zombie lie. That's just a bald-faced lie. He brings up the Afghan girls again, as if this man, the wars that he advocated, and I know I'm a little bit of a broken record on this, but it's women and children who suffer, if not the most, then they're at the top of the list of people who suffer the most from wars, from living in war zones, from having to flee countries. I mean, it's just absurd for me to hear someone like Bill Kristol trying to exploit women for this, to make his argument that intervention in our wars are good, and it just really pisses me off. So I'm just going to keep saying it. I wanted to mention that they had their opening remarks, and then what was it, rebuttals after that, and I guess Scott ran over a little bit. So the moderator, Gene Epstein, was like, well, he went over by 2 minutes, so Bill, you get an extra 2 minutes. And Bill, right off the bat, he goes, no, I don't need the other. He doesn't take the 2 minutes. There, he has 7.5 minutes for the closing remarks, and he takes less than a minute, I would say. Scott takes, as much time as he can get. And he says during that time, he's like, and by the way, I can't hang around and mingle because I have to catch a plane. And I'm like, who schedules a plane immediately after a huge debate in New York? Who? And when they finished the debate, well, first of all, he was dismissive of Scott throughout the whole thing. Some of the time he's scribbling in the beginning. He's scribbling. Then he's just sitting there like this. I actually have some screenshots of this. And then sometimes he's just like, he can't argue. He can't make a coherent argument against him. So he tries to use body language to dismiss the things that Scott is saying. And then at the very end of the debate, he's got to catch his plane now. The moderator says, Scott's going to be there. He's going to be right over, here for a while if you want to talk to him, and he's going to be at a watering hole afterwards. So Scott made himself very available. He's going to talk to every person who comes up to him, basically. Kristol hightails it out of there, literally runs off the stage. Well, okay, walks fast off the stage. He barely looks at Scott. He's just like, it's a very quick handshake. It's just like, I don't even know if he looks in Scott's face when he does it. And then he just zooms off the stage to the backstage and leaves. And I just kept thinking, well, why did you do this debate? Why did you even do this event? I don't understand. He could have even gotten out of it because this was postponed at least once, maybe twice, because it was scheduled like a year ago. I don't understand why the guy did this. So several times he forfeited extra time. Had the opportunity to speak, didn't do it. And like I said, then he runs off the stage and leaves. I'm like, why did you even do this? Denies that we're an empire, tries to use these euphemisms for empire. And I don't know. And I just want to say one more thing is that I was so glad that Scott brought up Libya and the slave trade and things like that, because that is, such a horrible thing that it sticks in everyone's mind, and you absolutely just can't. There's no coherent response to that. And Scott brought up lots and lots of points, but that's one of the big ones that he put out there. And he also, one of the things that Scott does really well is, and all Kristol does is say, oh, the Taliban, you think they're going to be good for, this is not good for the Afghan girls. But Scott cites numbers. He talks about civilian deaths, right? And he did a lot of those. He cited a lot of civilian deaths in all different countries. And that's just something that isn't really done very much here. So I was very glad that he did that. One more thing is that Scott provoked Kristol. Toward the end, he was saying, we created a holocaust of civilian deaths in other countries, which of course Kristol then didn't argue against how many civilians were caused. He just was insulted that he used the term Holocaust for that, which is kind of what I expected. But more than he also, you might have to help me with the details on this one, but he said that where did he say 6,000, twice the amount of people that were killed in New York. He was very conscious of where
that
he
was.
Scott.
A question from the audience, I think, and
Yeah.
it was into like the Chinese hitting like the Nimitz or something
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
it was a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Because there were that many on a ship, and okay. But I thought Scott did that well. He was very conscious of where he was, and used that to his advantage in the debate. I think that's all I got.
All right, Connor, what else you got?
Well, I'll say, pivoting off of what Joanne was talking about, well, the great part of that was he was talking about the numbers, and he was going through, like you said, civilian deaths, and he talks about how the decades of backing death squad governments in Guatemala and El Salvador and Nicaragua, and he talks about, and then he goes, look, the American government killed approximately 2 million Koreans, 3 to 5 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians. He goes, the domino did fall. The commies took Cambodia and killed another 1 million or 2 million people. And he goes through all of this, and he's talking about the Iran-Iraq war, and he goes through, and so Kristol did the pathetic thing, which is, he goes, oh, you're trivializing the Holocaust by using this term.
Yeah.
And Scott's rebuttal was devastating, because he said to him, really? A neocon basically telling me I'm trivializing the Holocaust when you have called every single, not like just small potatoes dictator, like, comparatively, like, he goes, Gaddafi, the guy from Naked Gun 2, you've called him Hitler. Saddam is Hitler. He goes, Noriega, our old friend, that he's Hitler. Everybody's Hitler. He brought up McMaster saying Trump negotiating with the Taliban was akin to appeasement with Hitler. Chamberlain. And he goes, so you don't have the right to do that. He goes, I think that is trivializing the Holocaust. And he goes, it was incredible, because then I think they asked after that might have been another moment where they asked Kristol, do you have any response to that? And he's just like, he did a couple of these things. He just shrugs. He's like, nah, I got nothing. And it was interesting to see him so shaken by that. And there were a few great moments where Scott pointed out just the economic disparity in who benefits from this policy and who suffers from this policy. And he used the phraseology a couple of times about how working class people, middle class people carry this economy that is built for people like him on their backs. And you talked about the K-shaped recovery after 2009. And I think he even said a few times, he goes, the checks he's been cashing all this time, that money doesn't go down to the working class who have a higher cost of living. He talked about the Misesian business cycle theory, and about how, paying for the empire, trying to make it all seem free by just printing and borrowing all of it, it piles up the debt, and it leads to all this misallocation and malinvestment. I thought he did a good job of, quickly summarizing Mises's theories. And, I've always really appreciated how Scott connects that directly to foreign policy and directly to the empire. So even if you're not someone who is motivated by civilian deaths and just the macabre foreign policy of empire and all the people we've killed, then you could at least understand that it's not in your self-interest to be doing this at all, and certainly not in the so-called national interest. So I thought those points were terrific. And again, Kristol had nothing to say. He said things that are just, his argument was essentially, because I think Scott was responding to him saying things like, we can afford it. And he would be like, it's like, well, he goes, roughly, let's say it's like 5% of GDP. And that doesn't really mean anything when you're spending, trillions of dollars. We're spending more in the military than we ever have. You look at what's happened to our economy, how everything has been hollowed out, and also Scott connected that directly to the divisions and the breakup in the social fabric, and he pinned that on the neoconservative foreign policy, this war everywhere sort of mentality. And I also really appreciated how, he used Kristol's neoliberal, well, whatever you want to call it, this sort of faux liberal pivot he's made in the Trump era of being, aghast at right-wing nationalism and things like that. And he said, you basically, promoted the worst elements of this. And he directly brought up Frank Gaffney and people like that who are, I believe Gaffney is a PNAC signatory on a few of those documents. And, it was incredible. He used virtually every single, once they got beyond the usual thing about how we've made the world a beautiful place with our bombs rhetoric, once he got into some of this stuff about democracy, and I've been concerned about it here in our country the last 5 years, like I don't know what he thought, like that was to answer. I'll just say to close out on this section. What was interesting, what Joanne was saying was, I don't know why he agreed to this. I've been wondering that since this was announced. I'm not 100% certain that Bill Kristol knew who Scott Horton was. And if he did know who he was, I think he probably saw that the guy is the editorial director at Antiwar.com. And I wonder if Bill Kristol, I wonder if Bill Kristol knows what Antiwar.com is. I wonder how much he knows about Justin Raimondo and Eric Garris. I really would be interested to know, because to agree to a debate with Scott Horton, when Kristol is not the brains of even the duo of the neoconservatives, let alone the duo he has there with Robert Kagan. Like, if it probably would have made more sense. I still think Scott would have won, decidedly, but Robert Kagan would have been at least more competition than Bill. So it was imperial hubris for him to get involved in this debate. It was such a mistake. And Gene Epstein mentioned that, I think he said, if we go back, that this was originally scheduled, or decided that they would do this like in 2019, and then COVID happened, and there were, I think, even previous postponements and rain checks. So he's had all this time to just Google and look up who the hell Scott Horton is, and look at enough already. Look at Fool's Errand. Listen to a little bit of the Scott Horton show. See what the hell's going on. Check out the Libertarian Institute. And I don't think he did any of that, because I don't think Bill Kristol has ever been faced with a foe like that in a legitimate debate setting. In fact, there's clips you can find of him. I think he got into an argument with Peter Beinart once on the Bill Maher show. And maybe I'm thinking of another liberal in this case, but let's say it was Peter Beinart. I may be wrong, but I think it was. It's a famous clip where I think it was him, where he says that, look, my brother-in-law served in, I forget if it was Afghanistan or Iraq, and he basically said he doesn't believe in the war anymore, and he saw his friends. It was some stuff like that is, fairly mainstream criticism of this policy. And I think Kristol, if I remember correctly, turned red in the face and threw a fit and started saying, that's pathetic. That's pathetic. You're treating the troops like they're pathetic. And what he was really saying, I think, is that he doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't want to hear tears and pity about the troops and their friends dying and killing themselves when they got home. And I'll stop after this. I thought that was great when Scott brought up that, yeah, we've lost a few thousand troops in these wars in the last 20 years, but 37,000 of them have killed themselves when they came home. So, and again, he did not address that at all.
Absolutely great, Connor. I just want to tell people that I am recording this one on the road, and so my dog is down here with me, and he's just kind of walking around. So if you see him or I look like I'm petting something, it is my dog, and I'm not doing a tubing or anything here. Pat, what you got going on?
Wow, that was
what's another one?
That was brilliant, Kyle. Yeah, so I don't want to kind of advance our coverage of this unjustly, but my other big takeaway was just the white flag that Kristol put up at the end was, oh, well, Scott Horton was debating dirty this whole time. Like, I don't think you should walk into a debate assuming poor intentions of the other person. And that just astounded me. But I'm sure, Joanne, do you have anything, or Connor, anything to add to that?
Well, I didn't even catch that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I thought he was when that happened. I thought that was like him pulling out his pockets and being like, "I got nothing else," than to just say, "You're being rude, man. Like, you're assuming I'm a bad guy and I'm not." And in fact, he pulled the usual. If you watch A Very Heavy Agenda, there's a lot of clips where they ask Kim Kagan in particular, "Are you a neocon?" Like on the C-SPAN interview, and Kim Kagan always goes, I don't even know what that means, So he goes, I think he called me a neoconservative. Like, shut up, dude. You know exactly what you are. And that's why people assume the worst about you. And they're right to do so.
Right.
But that was a great moment.
This was actually the second takeaway that I was going to have is it ties into that perfectly, Connor, which is Horton came in and quoted Kristol quite a bit in his opening statement, right? Not a ton, not excessively. He didn't only focus on Kristol. He talked about other neocons, he talked about Obama and Bush and different things as well. And so it wasn't like he was solely focused on Bill Kristol, but he quoted Bill Kristol. And then at the end, Bill Kristol kind of said that was playing dirty, when in reality, I don't feel like Scott really ever put words into Bill Kristol's mouth or tried to hold him to a policy that Kristol himself either didn't advocate for. I think that was one of the real issues that Kristol had in this debate, is that he couldn't walk away from Scott because Scott knows everything he says, maybe even better than Bill does. And that's a really powerful thing to have. And it really goes to show the emptiness of Bill Kristol. Let's try to do maybe a lightning round of our final takeaways, and then we'll wrap up with our summaries of the debate. And we'll let Joanne start again. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I also have a pet who's loud over here. Yeah, so he even said, oh, I don't even remember what I wrote in my 1997 paper. So that did stick in his head. And he was like, oh, he quoted me. That really kind of got under his skin. And then he said he didn't remember what he wrote in this position paper, which is crazy. I kind of have already said all the things that I think I'm going to pass on this one. I think I've given all my points already. So,
all right.
I'll say that I thought that we just watched. Well, the first thing I said in our chat was we witnessed a murder, which I think we did. I think that in anticipation of this, it's easy to lose sight for people who don't know enough about these guys that this was history in the making, and that Bill Kristol is kind of like the evil analog in a way to Scott, because, Bill Kristol, I feel like, so there's the history of the neoconservative movement before the 90s. In fact, there's a great part in the debate where he addresses the World War II tropes, and he talks about how Wilson's intervention set the stage for World War II, and he talks about how this led to, the rise of Hitler in the intervening years before World War II, and also Stalin and Trotsky. And when he says Trotsky, he goes, "No offense." That was so good. And Kristol goes, "What?" It was so, that was one of my favorite parts. And then I'll just say, it's interesting because Kristol was, as he pointed out, there's a great line right in the beginning of Scott's opening statement where he goes, "I'd just like to point out to everybody that Bill Kristol was the chief of staff to Dan Quayle, who I think was our finest vice president of my lifetime." And then he goes, remember who the other vice presidents were, which is just funny because Dan Quayle is it's hard to explain because I wasn't alive then, but I know enough about Dan Quayle to know that when he was vice president, to know that there's never been a bigger clown.
He was a laughing stock. I was alive. He was a laughing stock. No one took him seriously. He was an embarrassment.
So it was a wonderful way to open it. And then just to say, it's just funny to me because Kristol sort of, as you know, he was backed by Rupert Murdoch when he founded the Weekly Standard with, I believe, Robert Kagan, and then PNAC, which was backed by, you know, people like Bruce Jackson, vice president of Lockheed, who was also behind, as Scott points out in his other work, the Committee to Expand NATO, and I believe also the Committee to Liberate Iraq. So, and I mean, he was also pointing out that without being too gratuitous about it, that Kristol is tied up with, you know, the military industrial complex. And he could have really hammered on that if he wanted to. So I'll just say that it's interesting because Kristol was kind of a outside of the government kind of ringleader, might not be the exact right word, but as he said, he led the neoconservative movement in the popular sense. He wasn't Pearl or Feith or Worms or Wolfowitz in the government itself. He wasn't Scooter Libby, but he was outside of it, like Kruthammer, as the public face of neoconservatism, which I saw quite a bit growing up. So I've been waiting for this, you know, ever since I found out about Scott and Antiwar.com. And Scott, if you know Scott's history, you know, of course, is formerly Justin Raimondo's editor and then becomes the opinion editor at Antiwar.com and is now the editorial director there. And Scott has been, you know, like what Kyle does, curating the viewpoints for Antiwar.com every day for years and years and years. So, you know, it's obviously a way better outlet. It's incomparable. You can't compare it to the Weekly Standard or, you know, the Bulwark or whatever the hell Kristol is doing now. But it's kind of interesting that Scott, with the Scott Horton show and Antiwar.com, has been kind of the nexus of the anti-war movement in many ways, you know, talking to people from all these different parts of the spectrum, people like Joanne and people like us who are more libertarian, and also the paleocons, of course, people like Daniel Larison, et cetera. So it was just interesting to see, basically you put a guy who's kind of like a leader of the anti-war movement, who, you know, edits these different publications against the you know, like I said, the public face of neoconservatism in these different outlets that have been pushing war for the same duration. And just to put them in the same place, to me, I think, maybe I'm not doing a great job of explaining it, but it seemed very historical and very, very, I think that we'll be able to show this to people who are not necessarily so into foreign policy or politics, and they'll be able to very clearly see, really, because the anti-war movement is not nearly as visible as neoconservatism or the liberal centrist imperialist you know, viewpoint that's we're kind of drowning in and have been my whole lifetime. So I think this was a wonderful way of unearthing that divide and putting it right in front of everybody's face so they can make their decision finally, which we should have done a long time ago.
Connor, didn't Bill Kristol inherit that leader of the neoconservative Warhawk movement from his father? Didn't his father found it, Irving Kristol?
Yeah, certainly. I think Irving Kristol and Norman Podhoretz, and also the other Straussians who went into, you know, Scoop Jackson's office, people like Pearl and Elliot Abrams and Wolfowitz as well. There's a few different lineages and different things, but yes, certainly Irving Kristol, of course, was one of the leaders of the movement. And I have to go and double check how involved Irving Kristol was with Leo Strauss, but certainly. You know, Irving Kristol is, you know, one of the main neocons.
Like a founding father kind of thing.
Yeah, since the 60s for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I know there's the National Review group that Rothbard talked about quite a bit that took over and kind of purged the right wing. But I think I'm fairly certain that matches up perfectly with the timeline of the rise of people like Podhoretz and Irving Kristol.
So it's almost like the lineage, whatever, the inheritor, the sire, the heir of the war movement versus the grassroots now leader of the anti-war movement. It's good the way you framed that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to put this in my final takeaway, Connor, but I think it'll be fine to add in now. So obviously I agree with what Scott had to say and everything. And going into it, I thought Scott was going to do well in this debate, but this maybe went as perfectly as it could have gone for Scott. like you kind of maybe think that Bill Kristol really is a know-nothing chump that just knows these talking points and will be completely outclassed by Scott Horton. But then again, at the same time, like maybe he really is very well read and could craft some very clever arguments around a resolution. I have, I participated in debate for a long time. I have watched far smarter people lose debates to very stupid people who are able to craft savvy or kind of complicated arguments, or somebody who is not even very well spoken or not particularly smart but is very well read on a particular issue, could just make the argument maybe so nuanced. And Bill Kristol had none of that. He had nothing for Scott at all. And I mean, in every category, as far as, being well spoken, as far as being able to like pull quotes, to pull dates, to seem on, atop of the subject, to craft arguments that were sensible towards the resolution, showing how these regime changes have failed. His response in the question and answers. I mean, telltale signs that somebody has lost a debate is if they give their final speech sitting down. That is maybe the best sign. If your opponent gave their final speech sitting down, you either know you lost the debate or you won the debate. There is no question. And he had to know he lost. If you give your final speech and it is a minute long, you probably lost. But if you get off the stage as quickly as Bill Kristol did, you definitely know you got hammered and you're pissed about it. You know what I mean? I do not think Bill Kristol is happy. And the problem that the Hawks have is they can't walk away from Bill Kristol. He has been their guy on news. They can't, I mean? They can't say, he was really like this obscure, like kind of actor, or, what I mean? Like it was like, even if it was maybe Robert Kagan, one of the downsides to that would be people don't know Robert Kagan as much as they know Bill Kristol. You know what I mean? Bill Kristol rides around with rappers and limos and stuff like that. Like, he's tried to become a sanitized figure in the past few years. And they can't walk away from him. And there is no part in this debate that you could bring up that Bill Kristol could even, he didn't win the argument on the Holocaust, as we brought up. He didn't win it on blowback. He didn't put anything consistent together. He couldn't prove that he cared about the lives of the troops more, the lives of people more. What about the lives of the Afghan women? This is the guy that's trying to minimize the entire debate, all the consequences and the people who have died from his wars. He spent so much time on Syria, which Scott absolutely hammered him on. Maybe the only place that I thought Scott would have had a better line was when, Bill Kristol asked about the people of Afghanistan, and Scott said, do you think their lives will get better? He said no, but maybe said something like, but you didn't care about them before, or something like that, or they were bad before. And then the one other one was when he said something about how, oh, you think America is this evil thing, or something. Like he tried to like say that Scott was saying America was bad. And Scott did say that, like, no, I think you and your friends are bad, but I just wish he would have said it. Like, no, I think you are the problem. You know what I mean? Not Americans, you. But other than that, I mean, this was absolutely great. Like sometimes, like the ends of TV shows or something like that, the writers don't get it the way you hope they do. But the Matrix, if we're in a Matrix, it nailed the simulation 100%. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'm going to look forward to watching this again, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it for a long time to come. I think this was pretty monumental. So I don't know, Pat, do you have anything else? Or if no one else does, we can maybe like just give like a little short thing at the end, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, just briefly, I was trying to think of a good historical parallel to the events that we saw unfold tonight, and I think the one that I chose is the Battle of Agincourt in when the British went up against the French, and I believe this took place in France, but this is that famous battle where all of the French royalty and all of their knights were dressed up in their huge suits of armor, and the day before the battle took place, it rained heavily on the battlefield. So the entire battlefield was made of mud. And the British were just there with their longbowmen and a bunch of peasants with hammers and clubs and knives and stuff. And so the French charge in all their glory, and they get mired up in the mud. And the British longbowmen just, go up and they just massacre the French. And I think that's a good parallel here. The other one that I was thinking of was, if anyone watches UFC, and I'll be brief here if you don't, but there was an episode, or there was a season of The Ultimate Fighter where they did Second Chance, and so they had all these old fighters from the UFC who had been in the UFC but their careers were waning, and the winner of the Ultimate Fighter competition was to go up against the reigning champion. And so Matt Serra is a fighter who had been in the UFC for quite some time, and he wins, and he's the underdog going into this fight against George St. Pierre, who is like the greatest UFC fighter of all time. And Matt Serra ends up knocking him out in the second round and just stunning everyone. And I think Scott did better than Matt Serra, and I think Scott is a lot better than kind of a washed up Matt Serra UFC fighter. But I mean, just the caliber of this victory, and I think especially with the Gincourt, with that parallel, is just that Scott, like we were talking about, Scott being the grassroots, and I don't want to cheapen Scott's victory at all, but Bill Kristol's performance was so poor that I think anyone in this call, except for me, but any of you could have faced him and at least won. You wouldn't have maybe gotten the knockout blow that Scott did, but I think in a stand-up debate, any of you guys would have won this tonight. I think his performance was that poor.
I think you would have won, Pat.
Okay, well,
No
thanks.
question.
Should we say, Kyle, that that Scott officially won at the end? You vote before. Some of these formats are similar. The crowd votes before the debate and after, and whoever changes the most minds or moves the percentage the most wins. And I mean, as if it wasn't already obvious, Scott won the debate, but he won it on the numbers too.
Yeah, and I believe the numbers, like Kristol went from 7 to 9%, and Horton went from
it's like
70 something to, yeah, right, which really said something, because like when you think, it wasn't like the audience came in 50-50, they came in 3/4 for Horton, and he still won the debate. Like Kristol had a lot of people that he could have made up or something like that. Also, he talked about all of his friends were there. This happened, remember, in front of his friends, and so there maybe was a little embarrassment on top of everything else. So that really was a huge part, is that it bore out in the numbers, and there's no way to look at the numbers and say, oh well, maybe Kristol was doing something right or something like that. It was 100% a loss. And so again, I may be like a little biased on my from my opinion, but I think Horton absolutely hammered the Neocon, and that's why I'm going to call this Horton hammers the Neocon. And we're gonna put it out there, and I hope people really enjoy. Like once the Soho Forum puts the debate out, take the time to watch it yourself. I think what people wanted from Scott is to hear him be able to do enough already in 20 minutes, and he almost does that. Of course, like Horton, he runs long, but he almost does it, and then he absolutely knots it out in his final thing as well. But I think he really dominated the whole time, and it's very fantastic, and everybody could learn a ton from it. Great turnout, and yeah, it was a huge thing. And big shout out to Scott's wife, Larissa Alexandrovna, who was holding it down and amazing in the live chat on YouTube the entire time. There was 100+ people who were actually watching the thing, in addition to the few 700+ who were there. Larissa was forced to watch outside, and she's a great journalist in her own right. She's not just Scott Horton's wife. I want to point that out. But tonight she was, Scott's big cheerleader in the live chat, and did an awesome job of it. So shout out to her as well. And great night. Anyone else with anything to say before we wrap up? Joanne Leon at Around the Empire, Patrick MacFarlane, and Conor Freeman at the Libertarian Institute.
The last thing I'll just say was concisely, this was for people who didn't already agree with us or the anti-war movement or non-interventionism, even passively, this was a revelation. Like if someone isn't quite sure, do the experts kind of know better than us, or this sort of thing. This reveals blatantly the intellectual and moral bankruptcy of not only neoconservatism, but I think Bill Kristol, even though he might have thought it was wise to sort of align himself with liberal interventionists, and that they might have felt it was wise for them to align with him in the Trump era, well, now he's synonymous with both sides, which he kind of always was, but especially now, it's just Scott just burned the whole thing down. I mean,
he's an empty suit, he's just a empty suit.
Which I think we all knew, but this is proof, absolute proof. So I can't recommend enough to everybody. Watch it as soon as it comes out and share it.
Yeah. Congratulations to Scott. Just a stellar performance, and
absolutely
heaven sent. That's how I feel.
All right. Thanks, guys. And we'll be back with more shows later this week. And be sure to check out the Libertarian Institute, where you can see Scott, myself, and everything else. Great stuff we got going on there. Thanks, Joanne.